It happened in the middle of the quarterly company-wide meeting, just after the catered sandwiches were set down, and right before they brought out the celebratory sheet cake that still makes my stomach turn to this day. The CEO, Paul, stood up in front of the entire room, tapped the mic, and smiled like a man about to announce his engagement. He adjusted his navy silk tie, cleared his throat, and said with a light chuckle, "Well, we all know Susan's been comfortable here for a while." But let's be honest, 16 years is a long time to coast. There was laughter. Actual laughter. Not loud, not raucous, but the kind of tight, polite chuckling that says, "We don't want to be next." I didn't laugh, I couldn't even breathe. My name was barely out of his mouth before I felt my throat clamp shut, like it knew what was coming next. And sometimes, he went on, a company has to make hard decisions, especially when some salaries just aren't sustainable anymore. So let's raise a glass to fresh starts for all of us. That was it. That was how I found out. No one had said a word to me beforehand. No memo, no heads up, no call from HR. Just that, the verbal equivalent of a shove off a moving train, right in front of 100 coworkers and department heads. I tried to speak. I really did, but my jaw wouldn't unlock. People started clapping, scattered at first, then more like an awkward wave of obligation. I could hear a fork clink against glass, someone cough into their fist, a phone buzz somewhere under the table. But it all sounded far away, like I was underwater. Even Rachel, the girl from marketing who used to bring me ginger tea when I had migraines, looked down at her hands and pretended not to notice me. And I just stood there, like a ghost in my own story. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't run out of the room, though God knows I wanted to. Instead, I reached for the cup of coffee I hadn't even touched, took one sip, lukewarm, and I nodded. Once Paul caught my eye as he stepped down from the podium, and I swear he smirked, like he'd just pulled off some masterstroke of cost-cutting brilliance. That was the moment I stopped feeling humiliated. I started taking notes, because what Paul and everyone else in that room didn't know is that I had a copy of the contract he signed last quarter, the one with the clause. The one he obviously forgot about. Or thought I did. I hadn't. And neither had the lawyer who drafted it for me years ago, just in case I stayed for the rest of the meeting. Not because I had anything left to prove, or because I wanted to endure the pitying glances, but because walking out would have felt like they won. So I sat through the next 30 minutes as Paul droned on about leaner operations and exciting new directions, casually stepping over my career like it was some old rug being thrown out. There were PowerPoint slides, bullet points, and fake enthusiasm from the newer team members. Some people whispered, others kept their heads down, stirring plastic knives through crumbs of lemon bars, pretending not to feel the awkward tension. Every so often, someone would flick their eyes toward me, then just as quickly look away. The way you glance at a car accident but pretend you didn't, and still I didn't move. 16 years I started at that company when we were barely more than a fold-out table in a rented space above a used bookstore. I'd built processes, onboarded half the senior staff, kept the books clean through 2 audits and 3 expansions. There were nights I slept in my office chair when we couldn't make payroll until the West Coast wires cleared, and now I was too expensive. I reached into my purse and felt the edges of the envelope I'd brought just in case no one knew it was there. No one needed to. Yet. By the time the cake was being sliced, Paul was making rounds like a wedding MC, glad handing his way through a sea of uneasy smiles. He didn't come near me. Of course not. But his assistant did, Kelsey, with her clipboard and shiny new badge holder, like being close to power made her immune to consequences. "I know this must be hard," she said softly, crouching beside me like I was a child who had lost her mom at the mall. "But it's really a compliment in a way. You were just beyond what we could afford now." I tilted my head. "Thanks for the clarification." And that was it. She gave a tight smile and stood up, clearly, relieved I hadn't made a scene. But I didn't need to, not yet. Instead, I waited until the final slide came down and people began gathering their coats. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked over to the refreshment table like nothing had happened. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, black, no sugar. Then just as I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I didn't look defeated. I looked ready. And that's when I knew for the first time in weeks I hadn't lost anything that couldn't be rebuilt. Just before the door shut behind me, I heard someone ask Paul, "So who's taking over her accounts?" He hesitated, then muttered something about redistributing responsibilities. Only he forgot one small thing: those accounts. They didn't return emails from just anyone. The first time I met Paul, he was a bundle of nerves with a briefcase too big for his shoulders. Back then, he wasn't Paul the CEO. He was Paul from finance, the new guy who shadowed me for 3 weeks. Because, and I quote, Susan's the one who knows where everything lives. We worked side by side in a tiny office with buzzing fluorescent lights and a broken coffee machine that coughed more than it brewed. I showed him how to organize vendor invoices, introduced him to our top clients, and even helped clean up a budget proposal he nearly submitted with 5 decimal errors. He used to bring me granola bars and leave post-it notes saying things like, "Life-saving catch again. I owe you lunch I never collected." When the founder stepped down, Paul rose faster than anyone expected. And I stayed where I was, director of operations, the unglamorous backbone. The one who never took a vacation because I was the only one who knew the system. Still, I didn't mind. I believed in the work. And when Paul was promoted to CEO, I was genuinely happy for him. I even stayed late helping him draft his first company-wide address. I remember him pacing my office, worrying about whether to open with a joke or a quote. We settled on a line from Maya Angelou. He never credited me, but that wasn't unusual. At first, the change was exciting. Paul was eager, energetic, full of ideas. We worked well together. He'd bounce strategy, I'd handle execution. He'd dream in big strokes, and I'd color inside the lines to make it real. But slowly, something shifted. He started inviting younger, flashier hires into leadership meetings, started calling me old guard. At first jokingly, then not. At one retreat, I overheard him tell a board member that Susan's great, but we need voices that reflect where we're headed, not just where we've been. That stung, quietly, deeply still. I pushed through. I coached new managers, handled crisis calls at 2 a.m. when a major supplier backed out, and personally kept our Asia-Pacific accounts stable when political tension rattled everything. I was the one who made sure no one panicked, who kept the ship afloat while Paul collected praise at panels and interviews. And yet my name started disappearing. A team memo about a project I had overseen from day one went out with no mention of me. Just Kelsey and the Strategic Development Group. At a Q1 review, I wasn't invited to present my department's performance. Paul said they wanted to streamline. I was told to send my slides to someone else, the same someone who had joined the company 7 months ago. Even then, I stayed late that night, reviewing their talking points, making sure they didn't misreport Q4 retention, because that's who I was, loyal to a fault. Even as the walls closed in, the real fracture came quietly. It was a Wednesday, just another calendar meeting at 9:30 a.m. budget review. Q2 adjustments. I clicked into the shared deck, only to find my slides had been replaced. Not edited, not updated, replaced. In their place was a presentation Paul had sent over the night before, directly to my junior analyst, bypassing me completely. It included ideas I had floated weeks earlier, models I had refined with precision, and even direct language from my notes. But his name was on the cover, not mine. When I walked into the meeting room that morning, Paul barely looked up from his tablet. "Thanks for compiling the numbers." "Susan," he said casually, "let Ben handle the walkthrough. It'll be good practice for him." I remember standing there, folder still in hand, mouth slightly open, and then just nodding, like a trained dog. Ben didn't even realize. He smiled at me like he was proud to be chosen. The worst part, I still helped him. Whispered corrections under my breath when he fumbled. Caught a 200K projection error in real time and redirected the slide with a single tap of my finger. No one noticed, or maybe they did, and chose to look away. In the months that followed, it got worse. Paul stopped looping me into high-level emails. Clients I'd nurtured for years suddenly started forwarding me messages asking, should I respond to this Kelsey person? It became clear they were being redirected intentionally. I brought it up once cautiously over coffee in the break room. Paul, if I'm being transitioned out of accounts, I'd appreciate knowing. He smiled. No one's pushing you out, Susan. We're just decentralizing touch points. You know, agile frameworks and all agile frameworks. As if that was supposed to justify ghosting 16 years of relationships. The final blow came when they launched a new campaign, a major internal milestone. I wasn't invited to the launch call. I found out about it from an intern who asked if I'd seen the rollout celebration photos. They'd even printed a banner, Vision 2.0, driven by innovation. Paul stood front and center in the photo, surrounded by people half my age, all wearing custom-branded sweatshirts. That was when I started saving things. I didn't confront him. I didn't go to HR because I'd seen how that went for others. I just saved emails, presentation decks, access logs. I took screenshots when things were mysteriously edited out. I downloaded backups of vendor contracts, especially the ones I'd renegotiated during the pandemic that kept the company solvent. And then I requested a copy of my original contract. Tucked within, in quiet legalese, was a clause. Termination for cost-related restructuring shall be accompanied by a 60-day operational transition period under the direction of the dismissed party. Paul never read that part, but I had twice. I didn't know what I was going to do with all of it yet, but I knew one thing. If they were going to write me out of my own story, I'd make sure the ending didn't go the way they planned. I didn't sleep the night after the announcement. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hands folded across my stomach, like I was attending my own funeral. Every sound in the house, the tick of the old hallway clock, the occasional creak of the roof felt too loud, but inside my head it was louder. 16 years, and I was too expensive. That line spun around and around like a cruel refrain. I remember getting up around 3 a.m. barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, heating water for tea. I never drank. I sat by the window and watched the neighbors' porch lights blink out one by one. The world kept moving. Mine had stopped by sunrise. My chest ached, not from sadness, but something deeper. A kind of hollowed-out pain I couldn't name. Something that felt like betrayal. And worse, shame I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I couldn't bear to say it out loud and make it real. Instead, I went into the office the next morning as if nothing had happened. I wore my navy blazer, the one I usually save for client pitches. I walked past the reception desk with my head held high, though I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes. Not a single person met my gaze. My desk had already been reassigned. No one told me I stood there a moment too long, staring at my nameplate, moved casually to a filing cabinet in the back hallway. That's when it hit me. They hadn't just fired me, they'd erased me. That was the moment I almost gave up. I went to the ladies' room, locked myself in a stall, and sat down fully clothed. My hands shook. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. I hovered over my husband's number, then my sister's. I needed anyone to tell me I hadn't imagined the value I gave to that place. Instead, I clicked on my camera roll. I scrolled through screenshots, documents, email trails, a folder labeled quietly, Transitions. I remembered what I had, what they didn't know I had. And I remembered something else too, Paul's signature on the vendor agreement we'd negotiated last year. It included a clause about contingency approval for any account transitions involving our overseas partners, a clause that required my written sign-off. I took a breath, then another, and I stood up. That afternoon, Paul called a celebratory handoff meeting with the new accounts team. It was all optics, of course, donuts, balloons, centerpiece, a little speech about fresh leadership energy. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. I stood in the back, arms crossed, a few heads turned. One woman looked like she'd seen a ghost. Paul noticed, paused, then forced a grin. "Susan," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here, no?" I said softly. "You didn't?" There was a beat of silence. Then he chuckled and turned back to the group. As I was saying, this transition is all about growth. Moving on from legacy systems and making space for new innovation. That word again, legacy, always used like it was a disease. I waited until he was midway through his next sentence. Then I stepped forward, reached into my bag, and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "For legal review," I said quietly. Paul blinked. Excuse me, I said nothing else. I didn't need to. He glanced down at the envelope. The color drained from his face before he even touched it. And then, someone spoke. Not me. It was Ben, the junior analyst. He cleared his throat. Paul, I didn't know there was a clause in the vendor agreement requiring Susan's authorization for the account transition. Paul's mouth opened. Closed. No words came out. Another person. Kelsey looked at me, then at Paul. Is this something we should have reviewed before announcing the team changes? The air shifted. Just a little. And then it shifted more when I calmly opened my laptop, turned it toward the group, and clicked play on a video file. No, it wasn't a hidden camera, nothing unethical. It was a recorded Zoom meeting from last year. One where Paul had specifically praised my negotiation strategy for securing our largest overseas renewal. The screen froze on his face, smiling, saying my name. There was no anger in me anymore, just clarity. I looked up. No one's irreplaceable, I said, but no one deserves to be erased either. Then I quietly closed the laptop, picked up my bag, and left, but not before making one final stop at the executive assistant's desk. Would you please let Paul know, I said gently, that since he's violated Section 12.3 of my transition clause, I'll be declining all future correspondence. Any communications should go through counsel. The assistant blinked, nodded, whispered, Yes, ma'am. As I walked out into the sunlight, I heard it. Not words, not laughter, silence. The kind of silence that follows after something permanent shifts in the air, the kind you feel in your bones. 3 weeks after I left, they held the Spring Strategy Summit. It was an annual event, half vision setting, half ego parade. Paul always made sure it was held in the largest conference space downtown with catered hors d'oeuvres, branded mugs, and a screen so wide it made even the smallest bullet point feel profound. This year's theme, The Future is Now. I almost laughed when I saw the announcement. I wasn't invited. Of course, not officially. But I didn't need a name tag to walk into that room. I'd booked this venue myself for 5 consecutive years. I knew every corridor, every dim hallway behind the stage, every AV setup protocol. And I also knew that Paul was planning to debut a brand new international expansion strategy, one built almost entirely on the vendor pipeline I had personally developed, negotiated, and structured. The very pipeline his team no longer had the credentials to access. But the real twist, I wasn't the one who broke the silence. As the lights dimmed and the slideshow began, Paul walked on stage to polite applause. He wore a cobalt suit and a grin 2 sizes too smug. Behind him, a slide lit up Q3 global rollout unlocking new markets. He started with confidence. For the past 8 months, he said we've been quietly building a global partnership engine, and today I'm proud to present a model that he didn't finish. A voice, small but clear, interrupted from stage right. Excuse me, I think there's something you forgot to mention. Heads turned, people whispered. It was Maria from legal. A woman most people overlooked because she preferred silence to confrontation. But in that moment, she walked slowly to the front of the room, holding a single sheet of paper. I just received this, she said. It's a formal revocation of authorization from our former director of operations. According to her standing contract, and I quote, no third-party transfer, internal or external, may proceed without written clearance during a 60-day post-exit term. Paul's face froze. The microphone in his hand twitched. Maria continued, her voice calm. And since this rollout references 4 of the 5 accounts under her sole negotiation, we may be in breach of compliance. The room stopped breathing, and that's when I stepped out. From the shadows of the side hallway, I walked in. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. Paul looked like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't speak right away. I didn't have to. Instead, I handed Maria a USB marked with a single word, timeline. She plugged it into the laptop on stage. The big screen flickered, and then played. First a spreadsheet, color-coded timestamps, metadata, then a series of emails, my emails, proposals, attachments, signed agreements. all showing my direct involvement with vendors whose names were now plastered across Paul's strategy board. Then came the recordings, Zoom calls, where Paul had deferred to me. Let Susan handle that part. She's the one who built the Asia model. Susan's retention plan saved us last fall. Let's just follow her numbers. The room stayed silent, but people began glancing at each other. Whispers bloomed. Finally, one of the VPs, Brandon, stood up. Paul, did you ever tell us these were Susan's frameworks? Paul stammered. We collaborated. Maria raised a brow. Is that what happened? Another voice from the back. Then why was she fired for being too expensive? That one hit hard. Paul tried to speak, but now his words came out fragmented. There was a restructuring. We had to prioritize vision alignment. I looked at him straight in the eye. Then I said the line I had rehearsed in my head 100 times. You didn't restructure, you erased. And this time I let my voice carry. You stripped out the one person who kept this company from collapsing during the 2020 crash. You removed attribution, silenced context, then repackaged it all with fresh clip art and hoped no one would notice. I let that sit. Then I turned to the room. People I'd worked with, coached, mentored, many of whom had stopped talking to me the moment I was labeled a cost center. My name doesn't need to be on the banner. I'm not asking for applause, but I will not let my work be stolen and paraded around like it magically appeared the minute I left silence again, heavier this time. Until Maria, God bless her, folded her arms and said, in light of this, I'm advising we pause this rollout until legal counsel can review all documentation. Paul lost it. This is a smear campaign, he barked. She's bitter, she's irrelevant. We've moved on. But the words landed flat. No one clapped, no one nodded. And then, the final nail. Brandon, the VP, walked up to the stage, took the mic gently from Paul's hand, and said, I think it's best you step down for now. The room didn't erupt. There was no cheering, just stillness. Paul looked around, realizing slowly, painfully, that the room he once commanded was no longer his. He dropped the mic on the podium, turned to leave, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost as he walked past me, he muttered, You think you've won. I didn't flinch. I didn't come to win. I said I came to correct the record, and with that, I stepped off the stage. Calm, upright, unshaken. Behind me, a slow ripple of murmured voices followed. One woman whispered, I didn't know she had all that. Another man shook his head. We should have asked more questions, but none of that mattered now, because in that moment, for the first time in months, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, just peace. The kind that comes from telling the truth out loud with proof, and watching the person who tried to erase you realize they never held the pen. After the summit, everything unraveled. Not loudly, not all at once, but in that slow, crumbling way that feels eerily quiet, like a building collapsing under the ground before the surface even breaks. The Monday after the event, Paul didn't show up to work. By Tuesday, a memo went out from the board citing an internal compliance review and announcing that Paul had voluntarily stepped aside during this period to support a transparent audit. That's corporate speak for, we don't want to say too much, but we've seen enough. Behind closed doors, people whispered in the hallways over Slack. You could feel the shift in posture coworkers who used to avoid eye contact with me now smiled faintly when they passed me at the cafe near the building. I even got a text from Brandon, the VP, who had taken the mic from Paul. You handled that with grace. I didn't have the guts. I'm sorry for that. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need his apology. He wasn't the one who had lied, or stolen, or erased. Still, it was strange. After all those years of silence, the noise now felt too loud. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Apparently, Paul had been repackaging my past work for over a year, not just client contracts, but even internal systems I'd implemented. He had used my language verbatim in at least 4 board decks and altered timestamps to make the work appear his. He hadn't counted on digital footprints, or a woman who saved everything. When the compliance team contacted me for clarification, I shared my documentation dates, drafts, emails. I didn't have to explain much. The truth was in the metadata. 3 weeks later, the board terminated. Paul for cause, no golden parachute, no farewell party, no email filled with gratitude for years of service, just gone. The CEO who had fired me for being too expensive was now the cautionary tale. The warning whispered behind closed office doors. Don't be the next, Paul. After his exit, something unexpected happened. The interim leadership team asked to meet with me. It wasn't flashy, just a quiet conversation in a neutral conference room, with a carafe of room temp water and a legal pad between us. We know the last few months have been difficult, one of them said gently. And we know we got it wrong. They didn't offer me Paul's job. That would have been insulting. They offered something better. Would you consider coming back as an advisor, set your own terms, lead transition strategy, guide leadership realignment? We'd like to rebuild, but right this time. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Instead, I asked for time. I walked out of that building and stood on the sidewalk watching people in suits hurry by coffee cups, in hand faces buried in phones, just like they had every day for 16 years. Only this time I didn't feel like one of them. I felt free. I took 2 weeks off, no emails, no meetings, no checking LinkedIn to see who'd posted what I slept in, read fiction. Spent hours in the garden behind my house that had long been neglected. I made soup from scratch. I had long phone calls with my sister. Something I hadn't done in years without multitasking in the background. And then one afternoon, as I watered the basil and listened to birds overhead, my phone buzzed again. Not an apology this time, it was Kelsey. Yes, that Kelsey. The one who'd once delivered my dismissal like it was a brunch menu. Her message was short. I've decided to resign. I'm sorry I played a part. I was wrong. If you're ever open to coffee, it's on me. Again, I didn't answer. Not yet, but I did smile. Not because I needed her to be sorry, but because she chose to be. The next week I returned to the office. Just for 1 hour, I stood outside looking at the glass windows, the gold lettering of the company name still unchanged, and then I walked in. Not to reclaim anything, not to confront anyone, just to sit. I took the same elevator I'd used for years, stopped by the break room, sat in the chair by the north window where the light always fell soft in the late morning, and I looked around. Some faces were familiar, some weren't, but no one looked through me. No one called me expensive, no one pretended I hadn't mattered, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel erased. I felt remembered. It was a Tuesday morning. The sun spilled gently through my kitchen window, catching on the rim of my coffee mug. No emails, no meetings, no spreadsheets to chase. Just the soft hum of the radio and the smell of toast. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't rushing out the door, heels, clicking, breath held tight. I wasn't performing. I was living. It's strange how silence, once terrifying, becomes something sacred. That silence taught me I didn't need a title to feel worthy, or a lanyard to prove I mattered. What I needed was space to remember who I was, before a man with a spreadsheet decided my value could be slashed and signed away. In the weeks after the boardroom collapse, after the CEO publicly apologized, after the HR director stepped down, after Robert's LinkedIn went suspiciously quiet, I didn't celebrate. I reflected, because what happens after justice is quieter than you think. There's no parade, no headline, just peace, and peace is underrated. One afternoon, I found myself in a small community college not far from home. They were looking for a guest lecturer, someone with real-world experience in operations and ethics. I sat in the back of the classroom, before class began, watching these young faces, filled with that raw, nervous curiosity I once had. And I smiled. I taught my first class the following week. Not from a podium, but seated at eye level with stories. Instead of slides, I told them about processes and projections, sure, but also about trust, and what happens when you lose it. After class, a student lingered by my desk. She looked all of 19. She asked quietly, "Why didn't you just quit when they treated you like that?" I paused, because for 16 years, quitting never even felt like an option. I'd bought into the myth that loyalty meant silence, that competence would protect me, that if I just worked harder, they'd finally see me. But truthfully, staying quiet was never strength. Speaking up, leaving with my head high, not my heart crushed, that was the strongest thing I'd ever done. So I told her gently, because sometimes staying is survival, but walking away, that's when you start to live. She nodded, eyes wide, and in that moment, I felt something shift, not in her, but in me. The healing had begun. Weeks later, my phone buzzed with a message from Linda, the receptionist from the old office. Just 6 words. "You handled it with such grace," I stared at the screen. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with clarity. Because yes, I had been humiliated. Yes, I had been betrayed. But I never stooped. And that, more than any twist, any reveal, any file I'd dropped on the table, was my legacy. We are not just what we endure. We are who we become after. I started a small consultancy soon after Just Me, a desk and a mission to help companies build ethical structures where people don't have to be destroyed to be heard. I took on projects that aligned with my values, declined those that didn't. For the first time, I was building a world I could stand behind, not for profit, for peace. These days, I still wake early. I still carry my old leather briefcase, scuffed but sturdy. And sometimes I still hear his voice in my head. "She's just too expensive," but it no longer stings, because I now know the truth. Expensive means you're worth protecting. Expensive means you've built something they can't replicate. Expensive means you've earned your place. So to anyone out there, anyone watching this who's ever been told they cost too much, asked for too much, expected too much, I hope you know. You are not what they dismissed. You are what you rise into after. If you've ever been quietly pushed aside, slowly erased, or told you take up too much space at work, this story was for you, because you still matter, even when the room forgets your name, even when the email leaves you out, even when the seat is no longer saved, you're still here. That's enough. And if this story whispered something to your own, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear how you kept your grace or found your way back to yourself. And if you know someone who's walking through something like this, send this to them. Sometimes all it takes is one story to remind us. We were never too much, we were just in the wrong room.